Green Purple Doffy finally took its first win at a regional, going 9-0 this past weekend at Core. We got ourselves a 5k leader here with 4 life. At the end of your turn, put 2 of your Dawn cards as active. So what this is going to allow us to do is basically stay very defensive. With cards like Paradise, Waterfall, and Spiderweb, we're able to get extra values out of the blockers we play in this deck, which makes it very tough for our opponent to finish us. And this deck thrives at taking the game out longer, dropping more bombs, playing cards that affect your opponent's board way more than they can affect yours, because what a lot of other decks are trying to do is just attack your face, while Green Purple Doffy tends to just stall out the game and take it over the course of 1 or 2 turns at the end. So while I was editing, I realized I totally forgot to shout out OPTCG. My friend Wraith, you guys should go follow him on his YouTube. I'll link it down in the description. He also has an article out on One Piece top decks if you guys want to give that a read. Congratulations to him. Want to give all the credit to him for pulling it off this weekend with a deck that nobody's done it with yet. Jumping right into the engine of the deck, we got ourselves the 3/5 Nami on play, and when attacking, you use a Dawn and you can look at your top 3 cards and grab a film card. This also includes Union Armada, and since we're running so many film cards, it's pretty rare that we whiff. I have seen a little bit of inconsistency with this card, sometimes whiffing, but for the most part you should be fine. If we get this out, we're trying to use it almost every single turn. We really want to get that hand advantage against our opponent so we can easily live all their attacks and push for game when we need to. Nami is an insane card. You're getting off a good attack, you're getting an extra card in your hand. If you get 2 of these out on the board and they're both getting you a card, it's almost game on the spot. It does have a very soft win con, but this is our main engine. Card's insane. To continue on the subject of engines, this is our other main search card, Buena Fiesta. It's got 2k counter, which is different than a lot of other searchers in the game, but essentially it's just any other searcher. You're looking at the top 5 cards. Besides Buena Fiesta, you're grabbing one. You want to use this at the beginning of the game, you're getting out your threats with it. Unfortunately, we can't get Doffy with it, but it does help us get out our combo with Luffy. We can get our Guillotine Tororo. We can get cards that generate more hand advantage, and of course we can get Union Armada, which can, you know, save our guys sometimes. But a 2k being a searcher kind of weird because you have to play your 2k more often, but with the incredible defense this deck has with all the 2 cost events, I think it's more than fine to be able to just play out a couple of these Buena Fiestas and not worry about the fact that you're playing out your 2ks. Starting on some of our staples, this sugar is definitely an absolute 4 of. On your opponent's turn, once per turn, when your opponent plays a character, if your leader is Don Quixote, rest up one of your opponent's character. After that, rest this character, and then on play, you can rest your opponent's characters with 4 or less. I've seen decks that aren't Don Quixote pirates play this card, so the fact that you get both abilities out of this card is absolutely insane. You completely mess up your opponent's plan unless they have the exact cards to deal with this. Unless they have like a small card and a big card to play out, usually what's happening is that they're tapping out, using all their Dons, and Sugar's immediately tapping the card that is being played, whether it's, you know, a 7, 8, or 9 drop. But at the same time, you don't have to rest the character that's played. They play a character, you can rest a blocker, you can rest a target that is better to kill, that could get more value. But all around, this card is amazing, has tons of utility. There's no reason not to play a 4 of. It even has counter. This card completely takes over games, and if your opponent is not efficient at dealing with what this card puts out, it can just win you the game on the spot just because of all the misplays it induces with your opponent. Another immediate 4 of is Monkey D. Luffy 7/7. He's a blocker, and when you play him, you can play another 4 or less film or straw hat card from your hand. So this card is pretty nuts because most of the time you are going to be playing that 4 cost or a 3 cost. You're essentially getting 10 or 11 Dawn of value out of 7. You can restand this with some of the restand spells that we have in the deck. And with Union Armada, you can basically turn Luffy into an invincible blocker. This card is probably one of the strongest blockers in the game. I think there's only a couple of other cards that have this high of a stat line that can also be a blocker. And the fact that it allows you to play out another blocker, which we'll get into next, easy 4 of. I don't think that you could ever run less, because if you play 2 of these and you have the combo both times, you pretty much win most games on the spot just because the immense amount of pressure that you're able to put out with this card. It has a really cool alt too, which I don't have here, but you should check that out too. Yeah, the card's insane. I love it. Never play less than 4 of. One of the last staples that's not a spell card in this is this 4/5 film Uta. It's a blocker, but the ability is insane because for on block, you -1 Dawn and you can rest on your opponent's characters for 5 or less. So if your opponent has 2 characters that are 5, that means that this ability is always going to get that value resting 1. You can rest a blocker. Most 5Ks have pretty high stat lines, so you're definitely cutting off a strong attack from your opponent. If it's a vanilla 5/7 and you're stopping that attack, that's insane. If you have 2 of these, your opponent is just not able to put up enough attacks to deal with this without just removing it straight up. Because if this gets the block off, then I mean, essentially, you're just losing a huge percentage of your overall attack. And the fact that it goes up to 5, there aren't a lot. I don't think there's any blockers besides like maybe 1 or 2 that have a cost or 5 or less. So this card can always tap a blocker if you're having to go for lethal the next turn. So it causes a lot of distress for your opponent to be able to make sure that they're playing around this card accurately. And just like the sugar, your opponent really has to be ready to deal with this card or they're going to misplay and just completely lose their own game. You know, that's why I love this card. I think in One Piece, the more times you can give your opponent a chance to mess up because of the complicated game plan you're running and the intricacies of what it takes to get around certain cards with layered abilities. That's why Green Purple Doffy is so successful, because people aren't ready to have a full game plan to deal with the disruption this deck puts out. So Uta, easy 4-of, the card's amazing. It'll continue to see play in any film deck, and it's going to be very hard to power creep just because of how strong it already is. And for our last staple 4-of, we have the 10-10 Doffy. On play, a total of 3 of your opponent's characters cannot become active during your opponent's next refresh phase. So this card is absolutely game breaking. If you can get this out on curve and it's a good position, it automatically wins you the game. In a lot of matches, if you can get back to back, it 100% will win you the games. There's no reason not to run 4-of. This is the whole meat of the deck. If there was a way to search it, it would be even more insane. But luckily, there's not a way right now. So that's why we run things like Queen and Guillotine Tororo, so we can try to get this card a little bit quicker, because it just is our bomb and will continue to win game after game, especially against Whitebeard, where they're always tapping down all their guys. They will get very, very hard punished by this card. So I don't think this is a negotiable less than 4-of. The card is too insane. Yeah, I'm glad it has no searchers because the card is too good. Now we get to the part where we talk about cards that used to be 4-ofs earlier in the meta and in the Japanese meta, and now have been cut down a little bit more. And first we have this 5/6 Queen, also a blocker with some counter. On play, -1 Dawn, you draw 2 cards and discard 1 from your hand. This card is actually like really freaking amazing in the end game. Just the only reason we probably cut it down to 2-of instead of having a 4-of nowadays is because we really don't want to be minusing our Dawn too much in this deck, because we don't have any ramp to get that Dawn back. So we're really just using this as an end game play, that in case we're just like a little bricked up, we can get rid of a counterless card for 2/2K counters in case we need to live, or even another event. Since there's no search stipulation, you're just drawing 2 cards. This card is also really good for getting you your bombs in the end game, such as your Doffy. But overall, I can see why this came down from a 4-of. It's good, but as stated previously, you can't really be minusing your Dawn too much in this deck unless it's the end game, because we need to get to our bombs. Another card that used to be a 4-of is this Guillotine Tororo. It's a 5/6. When attacking, -2 Dawn, you draw 2 cards, which is an insane ability. But as I said about the Queen, we're not really trying to minus our Dawn too much. We want to do that in the end game, but if we're playing this on curve and we get to 7 Dawn and we get to -2, we're setting off our Doffy another whole turn, and we really don't want to be doing that. We want to be able to push our curve, get our tempo, and then start being able to fish out some of our defensive cards and maybe some of the cards we need to really, really close out the game. I liked it at 4-of, but it being counterless and this deck being very bricky at times, I can definitely see why this has now been down to a 2-of, because while it can win you games, it can easily also just be a dead card the whole game, and just a card with like not a great stat line, because we're not able to minus the Dawn adequately to get the card draw that we want out of it. Just to quickly mention Bins, he's a 4/6 vanilla, he's a film, so he's a searchable beater. I like how he's the old style where they put the text box like completely over his lower half. For some reason, the newer cards, they don't do that. But I just want to quickly mention him. Vanilla cards are good in One Piece. Now to more of the spicier picks before we get to the events. First off, we have this Diamante, which is a blocker, and Don X1. If you have 2 or more active Dons, set this character as active. So the way I like to compare this card, it's like a mini 7/7 kid from OP-01. Basically, you're just restanding this. It's a free swing every turn. You're getting a free 7 cost swing because our ability restands it. So we're just going 7 every turn. We have a blocker. We're protecting ourselves. We're restanding it. We're just keeping it healthy, and it's just going to do a ton of damage throughout the game. Though it's only a 1-of because it can be a little iffy if you need that sort of ability, but when it is clutch, it's really clutch. I watched this card do a ton of work in the finals against Kid. It was able to just like stop the Kid ability every step of the way while still applying pressure. Maybe this could go up to a 2-of, but I definitely appreciate a 1-of just because the card is so good. When it's actually good. Sometimes it's just bad though. So this is spice that I had not been aware of. I was looking at more deck lists before reviewing this one to see the progression of the decks, and it looks like about 2 weeks ago, people started putting in this Shiki. I guess we want more searches. We want a card that is also constantly putting down pressure in a similar way that Diamante is, because once this guy goes sideways, I mean, because like you're playing it on 6, so the next turn you're going to have 8, so its ability is basically always active, and it's just not killable. So you're just putting pressure every single turn. They have to kill with removal, and there's not a lot of stuff that kills a 6/7. And also somehow it has counter, which is really good, so it's never a dead card in our hand. But I was not aware of this card. It seems pretty good. I believe the unkillable ability is always going to be good. You know, Borsellino's always been a nightmare. Even using Union Armada on something, I guess I'll reiterate the point. Unkillable is an extremely powerful ability, and I can see why we want a little bit more of these types of cards to fill out our curve and have like a really strong mid game where our board isn't white because we're a deck that needs to win from the board. Just a quick touch on the amount of 2Ks. We're running 9 2Ks in this deck. They're all searchable, and we're running so many events that we really don't need to run that many 2Ks, but the fact that all our 2Ks are searchable, we're adding consistency to the deck. We're adding a nice amount of counter for decks like Whitebeard. But that's the main part. All our counters are searchable, and that's very, very good in this type of deck. But 9 is a little low for the most part. I guess some decks run 8, but I think that most decks probably run 12. And the only way that this is even possible is because we are running just so many events down here at the bottom. Speaking of events, we got our first one, which I think is the best one. We got Spider's Web, which is an easy 4-of. You up to one of your leader characters gets plus 4,000 this battle. After that, make one of your characters active again. And the trigger is also insane because you get plus 2,000 to your leader. I don't see it that often come up, but you know, I've had cards that have the plus 1,000 ability just win me games. So I can't imagine your leader going from a 5,000 to a 7,000. Like that's almost like an unwinnable situation. The main thing we're using this card for is to restand our blockers. So Luffy's going to get double value. Uta's going to get double value. It's insane because now we're making Luffy, we can put Luffy to 11k just with this card. So your opponent has to have a massive body and be very ready to be able to compete with this card. Yeah, non-negotiable 4-of, even to the point where we're running a card like Paradise Waterfall just to get this ability even more. That's how good this ability is in this deck to restand these blockers. So I misspoke on that last section. We actually aren't running Paradise Waterfall, so that's probably why we're maxing out on the Spider's Web, because that ability is really good. I have seen other lists max out on the Waterfall, but this one in particular doesn't. But that being said, we're going to get to the second best event in this deck, which is Punk Gibson. One of your leaders or characters gets 4,000 during the battle, and then you rest one of your opponents 4 costs or less. So like Uta is able to really slow down your opponent, this card has basically the same effect. The trigger rests on your opponent's characters also, which is game winning. I cannot tell you how many times I have lost a game to green because they hit Punk Gibson out of their last life. It is infuriating. This card is amazing. It helps you push for game. If your opponent plays a blocker too early, before you go lethal, you can just rest it down. If they have 2 cards that are attackers that are less than 4k, this cuts their attack ability in half. I mean, the card is almost never bad, and with, of course, Doffy's ability to leave 2 up, it's basically a no-brainer to run at least 3 of these because you're just always going to get it off. Though I'm not a huge fan of this card, it does come in clutch sometimes. When you need to use an ability like Uta or Tesoro, Thunder Bagua can get you back up to where you need to be. I think the only issue with this card is sometimes we're not getting down to that 2 life as often as we would like to, because we have so many blockers and our opponent is mostly addressing our board and not our life through most of the sections of the game. It's not till the end game that your opponent's really addressing your life. They're more trying to get through your blockers and kill your Namis. So I do like the trigger. I do like the ramp. It could be really, really good in this if you can get Doffy off 1 turn early, and you really only need to hit 1 ramp to get there. But other than that, I can see it as a solid 2 of. I might cut 1 just for another Punk Gibson, but Thunder Boga definitely does see its time from now and then. And like I said, you only need the trigger 1 time to really pop off with your curve if you're not minusing down with your other cards. This is another card that I was not aware had come into popularity in the green purple Doffy deck. We got Hell's Judgment. It's a 2-cost event card. You -1 Dawn, give 2 of your opponents -3,000 during this turn. The trigger, you like get rid of a Dawn. I don't think it's that good, to be honest. So I'm like not even gonna talk about it. But I can see this being like more popular nowadays just because of how strong it is. And the one time I did see it used was in the finals, and this card is insane against Kid. You know, minusing 3,000 to the leader on their double swing, it basically, I'm pretty sure it won him the game at the end of that game. But Hell's Judgment, it's only a 2 of in the deck. Really, really strong tech card. Again, you don't really want to be minusing your Dawn too much in this deck, but late game, this card can come in so clutch. Getting -6,000 for 2 makes it one of the strongest counter cards in the whole game. So now for the final spice, my favorite event in this. We're only running a 1 of, but we're playing Union Armada. Up to one of your film, leader, or characters gains 4,000 this battle. If that card is a character, the character cannot be KO'd. So basically this is, I want to call it a cheese card. This is like make your opponent very sad card. Because there's certain instances where your opponent really needs to kill your Guillotine Tororo, or they really need to kill your Nami. And they can't, because once you put Union Armada down, there's just no chance they're going to kill it. The trigger gives you that ramp effect, which also I like too, because like I said, you only really need 1 ramp hit to really put yourself ahead of your whole curve. So I know that maybe you could run 2 of this. It's a solid 1 of. I'm personally biased towards the card just because I've gotten wrecked by it by so many times. Because when you try to kill off the valuable searches that they have, or any guy, even a Luffy, like even the worst thing of like you going at life for like 13k or something with a big body, and they just block Union Armada and then restand it. There's just, they now have an invincible blocker that you can't deal with in any way, shape, or form. So I like it as a 1 of. It's a lot of spice, and I really like where the deck has come from, where it used to be ultra generic, and now we see people like testing out 2 ofs, 1 ofs, which personally I enjoy in a card game, even though it's less consistent, and I know other people would disagree with that type of play. It definitely puts your opponent a little more on edge, and them not really understanding everything that's in your deck because you're playing 1 ofs. And if you, let's say you play a Diamante, they're gonna be like, oh shit, does this guy have more Diamantes? But you know that's your only one. If you play your Union Armada early, they'll be like, wow, am I gonna deal with this again? You know? So I think 1 ofs can be very powerful, and I really like where the direction of this deck is going. And again, congratulations to Wraith for taking it down and being the first green purple Doffy to go all the way in a regional. Yeah, I think I just said it. He made it all the way. First person to do a green purple Doffy. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.